Hitting the record. Okay, it is recorded. And so I'm going to introduce a bit about our presenter, Mike Travers. He is a Spanish teacher from Wellesley High School, Wellesley, Massachusetts. And he has presented on the topics of grammar, curriculum design, and effective teaching strategies at Massachusetts Foreign Language Association and AFAL and NECTFL and ACTFL, although I don't know exactly
I'll
what
fill
all
you
these
in.
okay acronyms stands for, but I'm sure it's some kind of foreign language association. And Mike serves as the president-elect for the MAFLA Board of Directors. So I'm gonna pass the torch to you, Mike.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Coming to you live from Wellesley High School during my prep block. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you all to chat about my favorite thing in the entire world, grammar. If at any point you can't hear me, I'm purposely kind of whispering because we have sealed by literacy testing happening right next door to me. So if I have to raise the volume, I will, because we want to make sure we're chatting about this. So if you missed it from before in the chat, I'll send it one more time for you, the link to the slides if you want to follow along. I have lots of different examples, lots of different stuff for you. But we're going to talk today about using grammar in our units, because I think a lot of the times what happens is we spend a lot of time talking about how do we teach grammar, how do we get kids to notice grammar, how do we do the upfront stuff, and then it comes to the point where they actually have to use it, and we go, wait a minute, why aren't you using it? What happened here? What happened to all that work we did up front? Where's kind of that mismatch between the two? So we're going to talk lots and lots about that. So if you'd be ever so kind as to join me in the chat, I'm going to try to make things a little interactive as much as possible. There will be a couple breakout rooms, so mentally get yourself ready for that. I'll let you know when those are coming up. But so what I want you to do is in the chat, you can use words, you can use symbols. If you're just on like your phone or for something, you can use one of those reaction buttons. But I'm going to show you a statement. And I want you to just tell me what your reaction is. Again, I don't need a dissertation on each one of these. Word, sentence, sentence might even be too much, but just some sort of reaction when you see these types of comments. And you might relate to them personally. I know I've related it many times to these. So what about this teacher that says, "Oh, we spent so long working on that grammar point and they still aren't using it?" Go in the chat and give me in the chat and give me some sort of reaction to that, whether it's like, yeah, I feel that, I relate to that, or like, no, that's not me. It's been so long and they're just not using it. I see been there. I see sometimes. Natural. Yep, totally. The dots I'm loving. Perfect. Yes. And if you feel more comfortable, you can send me the private message if you're like, I don't want the world to know what I think about this. It's okay. Judgment-free zone, right? A good question of using it correctly. Yepers, it's me. Yep. All right, let's try another one. What would your reaction be to, I feel like I'm the only one that's actually working with the grammar. They don't take any ownership of the learning. What are some reactions to that one? Feel the pain. Oh, I didn't know the eyebrow one existed. I like the eyebrow emoji. What's in it for them? Because it's boring. Siempre. Yeah, and these are going to be different reactions for different people, depending on different situations, depending on a whole bunch of different things. All right, let me try one more for you. What about the one that says, I feel like I'm constantly forcing them to use the grammar. I wish they would just use it on their own. I see the siempre, the teardrops. That's right. Do they have a reason to use it? Yes, I like that. Perfect. All right. So this is going to kind of be the starting point for us, right? So these are going to be some of the things that we're going to be talking about is helping students to kind of get ownership of those moments where they say, oh, I actually need this grammar to do something with it. There's actually a reason for why I'm learning this grammar. There's a purpose behind it. So that idea of ownership and trying to get them to the place of understanding where it fits into what we're doing instead of the force, like, don't forget to use this, don't forget to use this, the kind of getting them to that place. That's what we're going to try to aim for today. So we're going to talk about two different things. We're going to be mostly talking about these ideas of communicative tasks and how those can be really, really helpful for us as we design these. And then we're going to be talking about how those tasks have to look different at different stages of our unit, meaning that what we ask kids to do when we in the beginning of a unit needs to look different than the middle and needs to look different than how we do it at the end, right before some sort of assessment. So we're going to talk through those different ideas today. So there's this school of thought out there, and I don't love the school of thought. I'll be the first to tell you. There's a school of thought out there that, wait a minute, we're not supposed to talk about grammar. At one point in the world, the grammar became like a bad word for some reason. I don't know why. I fully disagree with that completely. And nothing I'm going to say today is going to say to stop teaching grammar. I want that to be super clear up front because grammar is necessary. We need grammar to communicate. Grammar is an essential part of what we do. It's just a different relationship than maybe we've had with it before. But what we're talking about is just where does it fit into what we're doing when communication is the goal? So here are just some quick sort of reminders and some things. And when we talk about grammar, this is kind of the focal point of what we're looking at today. So first things first, when we talk about grammar, it should always be chosen in a context to promote the theme and promote communication. So we should always be choosing grammar that actually matches our goals, matches what we want kids to be able to do, and not just kind of marching along. We're like, you know what? We haven't done any new grammar in a while. Let's do those direct object pronouns now. We want to be thinking about, all right, how can I use this grammar to actually accomplish this goal? That's going to be at the center of what we're talking about. Another piece too, which I saw as a theme in our chat earlier, learners should understand how grammar is used to support communication. I remember when I was in high school learning grammar, I never knew why I needed to learn these tenses. I never knew why I needed to care about, these accent marks. When I was learning Chinese, I didn't understand why I needed to care about measure words. It just never, none of that ever made sense to me because nobody ever put it in the sense of like, you need this in order to do this particular thing. When we're talking about grammar as well, the focus is going to be kept on the meaning of the words first. Eventually, the form comes into play. But the way that we know that the brain kind of maps onto these things is we know that it basically thinks of grammar as vocab. So, for example, think about whatever language you teach. And whatever language you teach or speak, I want you to say the word I have. Now, whether you said tango, whether you said je, whether you said woyo, like whatever the languages that you just said that in, did you go to some sort of grammatical chart in your head? Did you go through the forms and go, okay, so that's a go-go verb. Okay, so that's, no, you just said tango means I have. And that's what we want to start with our kids is getting them to that place of this is a vocab word. And then we'll focus on the form afterwards. This is going to be a big piece of what we're going to talk about in a minute is meaningful input first. So making sure that they see the language, making sure they see how the grammar fits into other people using it before you expect them to use it. And then our job is to help them kind of get to that place where they see how it makes sense for them to use it. And we're going to create those contexts. And that's going to be a lot of what we'll talk about today. So that's kind of the background of what we're talking about when we say we're talking about grammar in context. That's kind of the less scary way to think about it. So if that was too many words on the slide for you, I'm with you. That broke my golden rule. So one of the things we're going to talk about is focusing on grammar is no longer what we're saying. We're saying focusing on communication. Communication is the goal. We want them to be able to communicate. And communication means not just interpersonal, although a lot of what we'll be talking about today is interpersonal, but communication is interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. It's not saying we're doing grammar for grammar's sake. It's not just because we feel like it's time for grammar. It's grammar because it's needed to communicate. It's needed to complete some sort of goal. It's needed to move us forward in our proficiency. It's not starting with explanations and not starting with here's the grammar and let me tell you everything about it up front. It's starting with input. It's starting with learners processing grammar as input first and foremost, before anything else. They have to be able to process that as input. And it's not talking about students just learning the rules. It's helping them understand the grammar and in putting it in context and eventually getting them to the rules. That's kind of the simpler way of thinking about the slide from before, if that's helpful for you to kind of frame what we'll be chatting about. selfless plug right now, because I apparently don't have anything to do better in my life. If you're interested more in this topic, Catherine Ritz and I just published a book a couple of months ago. It is all about grammar. It's proficiency-based instruction. It's teaching grammar for proficiency. It's available through Actful. I'm really excited that this came out, and it goes through all different aspects that you could possibly imagine, from a little bit more about what I was just talking about, planning curriculum, talking about how to help learners process and language as input, helping them figure out the forms. If you're interested, check out the Actual Bookstore. Highly recommend. Obviously, I wrote it, but like, it was really fun. And there's lots of different examples in many different languages. We have Turkish, we have Arabic, we have Chinese, Spanish, French, Portuguese. So just a lot of the examples that I'm going to show you today come from this, just to kind of give you a little idea of what we're chatting about. So I see somebody also asking about comprehensible input, and I think it's important that before we start talking about output, that we talk about input. It's an important piece of this, right? So let's talk about what the definition of input, because I think we throw it out there a lot, and I want to have a common definition as we're chatting. So for my definition that I like to go to, it comes from Bill Van Patten. And so he says that language input is the language that the learner hears or reads that has some kind of communicative intent. So before we can start talking about output, we have to start talking about this input idea. We have to talk about how they see language first. So within this, he's talking about this idea of communicative intent, which sounds kind of scary, but it's basically just what is the message that the author is trying to convey. And when it's author, it could be the person speaking, the person writing, but there's always some sort of hidden message. What is it that they're trying to actually get out when they do that? And the reason why we have to think about comprehensible input and why we have to think about input in general is because you can't speak a language you've never heard before. And similarly, you can't write a language you've never seen before. If I was to ask you to speak or write a language that you've never heard before, you wouldn't even know where to start. You wouldn't know, does this language use characters? Does this language use the phonetic alphabet? Like, what alphabet does it use? Or if I ask you to start speaking, if you've heard the language before, you have like a starting place, right? But if you've never heard that language before, you don't know where that starting place even goes. And when it comes to grammar in particular, if they've never seen that grammar used in a real way, they're not going to be able to understand how they can use it in a real way. And that's what I remember from my high school experiences. It's just a lot of grammar explanations, never seeing how a real human, besides my teacher, actually used these grammar points. So in other words, input is going to be the basis for this linguistic system. If there's no input, there's not going to be any output. It's not going to be in there. So when we talk about input, a way to kind of think about it, I like metaphors and analogies and things. So picture if I had a bucket of water, for example, and this I would never do this to somebody because I think it's rude. But if I took this bucket of water and I threw it at somebody, obviously the person's going to be unimpressed when I do that. But as I throw that bucket of water at the person, right? Not every single droplet of water is going to hit the person, especially if the person ducks. But no matter what, it's impossible for all the water to hit that person. So some of it's going to end up on the ground, right? All these sorts of things. And then after I finish throwing the water at the person, they're probably going to start to wring out their shirt. I might even stain their shirt, depending on like whatever the material is. There's a lot of different things that could happen with this. So I actually think of this analogy as helping us understand what we talk about when we say input and what's going on in the kids' brains. So the input itself is going to be that bucket of water. So input is basically just any language that students, it can be oral or written, that students are kind of thrown at, or language that's thrown at kids, right? So that's the bucket of water. All of that water is being thrown at them. But like I said, not every single drop of water landed on that person. And so it leads us to this thing called intake. And so intake is where some of that is going to stick in the brains of our students. So we can speak in the target language all we want. We can give them all the articles we want. We can give them thousands of videos, but not every word is going to stick through. Just like how I'm this presentation, I know everything I say is not going to stick with us, and that's okay, judgment free. But so it's some of it is and some of it's not, right? Similar with the water. Some of it's going to hit the person, some of it's going to miss the person. And we all know our kids, there's going to be some kids that are going to stand there and take the water and want more of it and intake more of it. And there's going to be some kids that are going to duck and try to have as little water hit them as possible. Afterwards, we have this developing system, which is again another scary sounding thing, but that's basically where they take the input and they make sense of it. And so they're taking it, and so there's going to be even less language. This is kind of like wringing out the shirt, where even less of it is going to be there, but the shirt's still going to be damp. And that's where it's kind of seeping into the kid. It's seeping into their brain to help them make sense of it. And then at the very, very end, That's when we can expect our output. Once they've had enough time to see the input, have time to have some of it stick, maybe have repetition so that it sticks more, there's more chances for it to stick, have time for it to develop, and then have it get to that place where we can expect them to do some output with it. So when we're talking about grammar as input, like I said before, students should first interpret new grammar as input. That's the most important thing that we have to do. We can't expect them to get new grammar and immediately output it. There needs to be some little bit of time where the first thing that they see is that grammar used in that context. Those contexts are going to be often done through authentic resources or teacher-created resources. I think either one of those can be valuable depending on how they're kind of set up. With the teacher-created resources, just making sure that it sounds as natural as possible. But we're going to keep finding different ways to expose them to that language before we get them to that place of outputting it. Now, attention can definitely be drawn to that grammar, and there's tons of different ways for you to check out. I can give you a resource at the end for some free things from my blog that you can look to of how to draw learners' attention without just saying, this is the present perfect. You can have them figure a lot of that stuff out. And through that, also, students are going to help co-construct meaning of grammar. So, for example, if you're introducing a new grammar point, it should, like we said, it shouldn't be you always explaining it. Have them figure out some of the rules ahead of time. And there's lots of different protocols for that as well. But our job from before was to present the grammar and tell them what to do. But if we flip that and thinking about it's helping them process and make meaning of that grammar before we get them ready to use it, it kind of changes our mentality and changes the way we approach the teaching of grammar. So, for example, saying I want them to learn the future tense. Let's say that that's a goal that I have. It's a communicative goal because I want them to be able to talk about their future plans, for example. So I have this reason for why I want them to learn this particular grammar. I might provide them a reading that embeds the future tense. So I know that, for example, with my Spanish threes, when they learn the future tense, we actually have a series of like text exchanges that they read from like two kids like texting each other where there's lots of future tense embedded in it. After we do tons of different things with it, making sure we analyze it, we do all sorts of interpretive activities, we go back to it, and I might bold or color code those future tense verbs to really draw attention to them so they know what I'm asking them to look for. And maybe as a class, we co-construct where they notice, oh, I noticed this pattern. I noticed that it's basically just set up like this. I'm noticing that this is the letter that I'm seeing repeated over and over again. Or for example, for Chinese, I'm noticing that the le is at the end sorry, that's past tense. Yao would be future tense. Like I'm expressing something will happen. I'm noticing this character showing up every single time in order to make this happen. And then my job becomes to make activities to help kids see the future tense and learn that as vocabulary. So it's kind of flipping the script a little bit where it's they do the work, they figure out the explanation, and I'm going to help make those activities so that that can actually come to fruition. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this workshop. I signed up for a workshop on output. I signed up on a workshop to talk about output for this. So where does that come into play? How does that make any sort of difference with all of this? Well, like I said before, we need the input first, right? We need the input to happen first before we can jump into that place of talking about output. So let's kind of shift gears, right? Because we want to talk about, we want to kind of take the intention of if we do those things, then what? If we do that stuff with input, how do we get them to the place of outputting? So there are some different schools of thought on output that I just kind of want to put out there, just so they're out in the open and kind of come to a consensus of where I'm going to come from for today's time. So there are schools of thought that say you should only focus on input, where they say you should never force output, and by force they mean you should never, like the kid should decide when they get to output. And with this, they're saying it does take time to acquire grammar as input, so why rush the output? And there's some valid points behind that, right? Because kids take a while to process things. But then there's another school of thought that says you should immediately focus on output. And they say that output is the main reason why kids take language classes because they want to actually be able to use the language that they're learning. And there's some that believe the sooner we use it, the sooner they'll learn it. And these are kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum where you have some that are just like no output ever, only output ever. And the way I kind of live my life is thinking, well, why live on an extreme? Like, why can't we find some sort of middle ground where we say there's something right about both of those? Like, it definitely, input is important to focus on. It does take time. Output is also an important piece of what we do as well. So I land somewhere in the middle, and that's going to be where we're going to land for today's session. So input is needed. and it should be focused on first. That is kind of one thing research-wise that is non-negotiable is that input is important and it should come first. There's a really good quote that I like that kind of also explains why output is necessary. They say when we try to say something, we're forced to try out our ideas of how the target grammar actually works. So I really like that piece because we can do all the input in the world with the future tense, but until it comes out of my mouth or until I go to write it, I don't actually know how well I understand it. So in other words, output is how we truly see how they're doing with the grammar and how much more input we have to go back and how much more we have to provide later. So if I do a task and I realize that the kids are riding that struggle bus hard, where they're not really doing very well with the targeted grammar, I'm going to go back to some input activities to help them and see the language or process the language again before I help them do more output. So that's a lot of theory. Let's get into actual classroom stuff. Like, how do we actually do this stuff, right? Let's live in the classroom. I know that that's an important piece of this, right? So we're going to talk about this idea of communication and how we're going to use this to set up tasks. So again, this is going to come from Bill Van Patten, but talking about communicative ability is one's ability to express yourself and understand others and engage in communication, not just a habit formation with grammatical items. So he has a couple of things that he says are really important when we talk about communication, and we're going to use these. You are going to use these as well in a few minutes in some breakout tasks. But so we're going to talk about expression of meaning, meaning that you have some sort of idea, you have a purpose of why you're talking. It's not just talking for the sake of talking. Interpretation of meaning, meaning that when you produce language, somebody else is listening to it. Somebody else is taking your language and doing something with it. Negotiation of meaning, that means that there's a back and forth, especially in interpersonal, right? Whereas you say something, I don't understand what you're saying. I can ask you some follow-up questions about what you're saying. Context plays a huge role of what are we actually talking about and why, and the purpose. What are we trying to gain out of this communicative exchange? So the biggest question that we ask ourselves when we do some of our activities, especially when we get to the output activities, is does it involve authentic communication? So the questions to ask are what information or content is actually being conveyed, and what's the audience actually going to do with this information? So let me show you some examples here. Let's say that I have this activity planned or this goal in mind. I want students to be able to tell me a story about some juicy gossip they heard over the weekend. They've always got it. They've got plenty of gossip. It's one of the first words I teach my kids in the beginning of the year because I really need to know the gossip. So let's say that, right? So I want to plan an activity where they have to communicate authentically, and I want them to be able to do that thing. But if the activity that I plan is students will complete a verb relay race, where they have to produce all of the forms of that verb, they have to be the first group to be able to do that. If my goal is the juicy gossip, the verb relay race is kind of a mismatch. It doesn't help me to be able to get there. Versus planning a task where they actually have to do something where they give me gossip, that would be more of the goal. What about this one? I want to be able to find out my students' opinion about the best places to eat in their community. There's always opinions, please. Teenagers, there's plenty of opinions to go around for everybody, right? So something I could plan is a survey where they create a bunch of questions about the best restaurants and dishes. We administer the survey and analyze the data as a full class and then write a class Yelp review. Now let's go back to our questions. Do we have some information or content that's being conveyed? Oh yeah, plenty here, especially when we compare the verb relay race. There's nothing really being communicated there other than just a verb form. Here, they're using the verb forms. They're using whatever our targeted grammar is to actually do something, and there's a follow-up task that goes along with it. So that centerpiece is going to be the big one that we're going to focus in on. This last one. I want students to brainstorm why vacations are beneficial for mental health. So I have a good goal in mind. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this one and compare it to the middle one. Students write a list of 3 reasons based on an article and add one more reason, and then they share it with a friend. So they might read an article on why vacations are beneficial for mental health, and then they might share some of those ideas. But there's something different. There's something about the middle one that's different than the one on the right. I'm ignoring the one on the left because I think we've decided that the verb relay race we're going to leave to the side. The one on the right, where they're sharing ideas, there's something there. There's some communicative intent there. But the question I'm left with is this: what will the audience do with the information? I'm having a hard time answering that question, but I can definitely answer the question in regards to the middle one. So what we're talking about here are 3 different types of things we can do in our classes called exercises, activities, and tasks. And so the real gold standard of what we're trying to get to is tasks. That's going to be what we want to get to. And that's actually what that middle one, when we go back, this middle one would be an example of a task that we could do. An activity is going to be more like the one on the right. It's almost there. And an exercise is going to be the one with the verb relay race on the left. So let me show you some examples. We'll start with exercises. So there's no communicative purpose. That verb relay race, there's no communication going on between that, just getting that verb form out on the board is what I'm shooting for. There's no expression or interpretation of meaning. I can conjugate verbs all day long, but if I don't know what they mean, or if I can't use them, I'm missing that piece of it. And it's that traditional, if you've ever heard the expression drill and kill, it goes to these sort of exercises that we create where the focus becomes on accuracy instead of communication. Accuracy plays a role. We'll talk about, and accuracy does play a role in what we're doing, and when we're giving feedback, we want to focus in on that at certain points, but it's not going to be the primary focus. So if we look at these two examples here, completing sentences with the correct preterite verb, that's just going to give me some accuracy. There's no communication. I don't necessarily know what's going on in that sentence. Or writing 10 sentences to explain what you should do to live a healthy life. Be sure to use 2 commands, 2 double verb constructions, 2 subjunctives, and you can choose the other structures. The focus is less on really how to live the healthy life and really, did you use 2 commands? Did you use 2 subjunctives? Did you use 2 double verb constructions? But there's a way to still get at that same idea if we just flip it a little bit. As we move towards activities, activities have semi-communicative purposes, semi-communicative intents, but it's just lacking that last little piece of purpose. It does require some expression or interpretation of meaning. So for example, you're curious about how your partner spent his weekend, turn to your partner and ask what they did over the weekend. Be sure to also ask some questions, ask them back and forth the questions. So there's some communication going back and forth there, some expression of meaning depending on the kid though. Sometimes it might just do that thing that they all do where they just go, see, even though they have no idea what that person just said. They have that going on. On the right-hand side, we have that same sort of healthy living. We all want to live a healthy life, but we don't know how. Imagine you're making a TikTok with healthy living tips. Write out your script, including what you recommend doing to live a healthy life. So these are activities, and they're semi-communicative in the sense that they are communicating something. But that question that we looked at before was to who or for what? So if I look at this one here, without sounding too rude, why do their partner really, why do they care about their weekend? Some of them might actually genuinely care, but they're missing that piece of like, why do I have to listen to you? What's the point of me listening to you at this moment in time? When we're doing the writing out the script, what's the point of doing that? It's still having this piece of like practicing language instead of getting at that piece of context and content of why are we actually doing this? Tasks, on the other hand, they basically take activities and they just add that little bit of element to it. They are truly communicative and they provide some sort of reason for communicating. That's the real difference, is the why. Because the worst is when you get that kid that says, well, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to learn how to do this, right? And it's often just simple to take an activity and add that little bit of purpose to it. So let me show you an example. So this one first here. We're still talking about that weekend. Who do you think had the most chill weekend or the most adventurous one? Do you think your partner had that? Rate your overall weekend on a scale of 1 to 10. Go around the room, interview a bunch of different kids and figure out what they did over the weekend. Keep track of whether or not you think that their weekend was chill or adventurous. Finally, at the end, you're going to check your predictions to see if you were right or wrong. And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to jump into an activity that has us reading about what French teenagers do during their weekend. So this would be a communicative task, and it's a couple of extra steps, right? So if we compared, the first one was just filling in the blanks with passé composé or preterite or whatever past tense, right? The second one was just turning and talking and, what do you do over the weekend? Oh, this is what I did over the weekend. This third one just adds that little bit where it's like, I'm listening, I'm talking to you, because at the end, I got to make a judgment of chill or adventurous. I'm listening for some sort of reason behind it. Let's take that same healthy living one. So your teacher will be spending the summer in China and hasn't decided which city to stay in. Oh, sorry, actually, this one's not related to the healthy one. My apologies. First, read the information about what your teacher likes and doesn't like on vacation. Then choose one city, research it to see if they'd be a good match for your teacher. And finally, create some sort of visual presentation to convince your teacher to stay in the city that you researched. At the end, your teacher is going to listen to everybody and make some sort of choice. So that's going to be a communicative task, for example. It's not the healthy unit. I apologize. I should have kept that theme going there for you. But this one would be a task, for example, if you had a travel unit. Instead of just saying research and present on, 5 fun things to do in China, this one has a communicative purpose of like, I'm doing this for my teacher. I have to convince my teacher to go to this place. I have to convince my teacher that these are the best things to do. There's some sort of audience and some sort of hidden meaning behind what's going on there. So that's going to be a communicative task. So these elements, these tasks are always going to be set up using these same sort of elements. Each one of them is going to have some sort of context or frame. It's basically explaining the why. Why do they care? Why do they need to listen? Before they engage in the task, there's always going to be something that they do first, some sort of pre-task. So for example, you saw the rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, or listen to your teacher talk about their likes and dislikes and figure out what they're going to want to do. There's always going to be the during task, and then there's going to be something they do afterwards in the post task. So let me show you another sample before I kind of jump more into this. So a scenario, who do you think is going to be greener, you or your partner? Think about how positively or negatively you impact the environment with your day-to-day actions and ask questions to find out how your partner impacts the planet as well. Then you're going to determine what you think their ecological footprint is. So the first thing, the pre-task, after I figure out what my scenario is, I'm going to list 10 ways that I contribute to climate change positively or negatively. So I'm pre-planning something before I get into the task. Then I'm going to end up in a conversation where there's some back and forth. We're going to ask and answer questions, and I'm going to mark down on my paper whether my partner, does that thing, whether they don't, or if it's positive or if it's negative for the environment. And at the very end, I'm going to rate that my partner's ecological footprint. So there's a reason I had to listen to my partner talking about recycling and all these things, because at the end, I have to make a judgment and I have to be able to base that on something. I can't just pull that out of nowhere. Another example, and again, if you're following along on the slides and you don't speak Spanish, this would be one of those times if you go to the notes section, it's translated out for you. This comes from our Spanish 3 curriculum. So this is a simple one where you're just making some predictions about your partner's future. I have them look the partner up and down. Where, oh, what do you do? What do I think you're going to be like? I think you're going to live here. And I tell them they have to say, nice-ish things to each other. Like they can't be like, you're going to live alone with 20 cats. Like that's like if that's the person's personality, go for it. But like you want to be nice. Like you don't want to just say you're going to live alone forever. Like we try to come up with some nice predictions. Now, grammar, if we kind of put on a grammar focus for a second, the grammar you need in order to be able to make this prediction about the person's future is the future tense. So right off the bat, the pre-task is asking them to do something grammatical. Then they're going to chat with each other and they're going to get as much information. They're going to take notes on the person's future. They're going to find out, all right, what do you actually want to do in the future? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to work right afterwards? Do you want to join the military? Where do you want to live? What type of family do you want to have? Do you plan on having a family? Where do you like, what sorts of things do you want to do in your free time, right? They're going to ask all of these types of questions. Again, future tense is a grammar that would be used there. And as a follow-up, they're going to write some sort of note of encouragement to the person afterwards, where they say, in the conversation, you said that in your future, you will live in a big city. I think it's a good idea if you, for example, start saving your money now. Or, for example, if the person said that they want to study abroad when they're in college. Cool, you should keep studying Spanish. So some sort of little note of encouragement to help them go along with that. So let me dissect a little bit what went on in those couple of tasks before I jump into something else here for you. So in that context, there's 3 main things I want to make sure I'm doing. I'm always setting the scene. I'm providing some sort of reason for communicating, and I'm helping it feel as real as possible. Now, the reality of our situation is it's not going to be, it's still a classroom. We're still practicing language. It's going to be as real as we possibly can. When we do that pre-task, there's a couple of things that we want to do as well. Activating some prior knowledge. Some of that prior knowledge might be content related. Some of that prior knowledge might be grammar related. Some of it might be vocabulary related, depending on the stage of the unit that we're at. But we're helping them get ready for output. So we basically aren't just saying 1, 2, 3, talk. We're saying, you're about to talk about this. Let me give you something to kind of ease the mind a little bit and get you ready to talk so you know some content of what you're going to be talking about. Some great ways to do this are things like predictions, like what do you think your partner will say, anticipation, or preparing some sort of vocabulary as well that they might need to use in their exchange, kind of getting that right out of the way so that you don't have as many como se dices in the middle of your task. During your task, that's your main event. That's the main reason why you're going to be talking. And every single task is always going to have a goal of learning something new about your partners. Every single time is there's got to be something they learn, something new for that. And one of the things that I've learned over time is they're not going to remember. So some sort of method for tracking, whether it's a graphic organizer, a checklist, any of those types of things are really helpful to help them so they have something to look back on when they go to do their post task. And it keeps them kind of accountable. In the post task part, you're going to use that new information in some sort of context. So for example, when we looked at the ecological footprint one, that was the one where they're going to use what they learned about their partner. Excuse our bell. They're going to use what they learned about their partner and they're going to do something with it. It also holds them a little accountable where they know, all right, I'm about to have a conversation. I should probably listen because I'm probably going to have to do something with that conversation. So at that point, that's where you could say, for example, you can revisit the pre-task, like were your predictions correct about your partner or not? You could make a recommendation like we saw in the future plans one, and you can also prompt some sort of next steps for them. Again, like with the future plans one, where it's like, oh, you should do this thing, you should do that thing. Or with the ecological footprint, you could add another step to it and say, all right, here's what you can do to even lower your ecological footprint. So I'm going to have us move into breakout groups for a second, probably just for a few minutes, if that's okay. I'm going to give us time to work on that. If you'd be ever so kind, I did see some questions in the chat, and while you're in breakout rooms, I'll take a look at those and find ways to incorporate those in there. So if you could check out the document that I just threw in the chat, it's going to ask you to make a copy of that document. When you take a look at the copy of that document, you can add that right to your drive. And so we're going to go to breakout task number 1. And we're going to use what we were just talking about to transform one of these two, either exercises or activities, into a task. Now, all things considered, you're not going to have time to create the whole thing. It's going to be more of a brainstorming activity, and that's completely fine. But so you're going to choose with your group whether you want to look at the exercise or if you want to look at the activity. You'll see the topic and you'll see the targeted grammar. So for example, lodging in regions of a country with subjunctive, describing people, and adjectives. So you'll see what the person did for their exercise, what the person did for their activity. And what I want you to do is just kind of brainstorm together what are some things you could do as a pre-task. So for example, if this one would need a total revamp in order for it to be communicative, what could I do before they engage in some sort of task? What would my task look like? And what would my post-task look like? Now, I'd say, honestly, the exercise is probably the more advanced one. If you're like, I get this and I'm ready to just jump right in, start with the exercise. If you're kind of new to this concept, try the one with adjectives over here. We're describing people because remember, activities are almost tasks. They're just missing that purpose of why you're talking to somebody. So this one here, you see your kind of explanation. What would be a good pre-task? What would be a good task? What would be a good post-task to kind of wrap all of those things up? Okay. So you should have access to that. If you have problems accessing it, just let me know. I'll be happy to help out. But I'm going to have us move into breakout rooms probably for about like 7 or so minutes. I know that's a really specific number, but I'm going to have us move into groups for that amount of time, and I'll check out the stuff that's going on in the chat.
All right, I'm gonna break out. Let me know if you have trouble accessing your room. Okay, open all rooms. People should have moved.
They start to realize, oh, wait, I'm talking about something I'm going to do in the future. Why am I using the past tense to do that? Or I'm using the present tense right now to talk about a past event. We're helping them start to self-monitor that a little bit more. Versus end of the unit, students should own that grammar. They should know this is the grammar, this is why I use it, this is how I use it. And the teacher role becomes more as a coach who intervenes as needed. So when we think about those tasks that we were looking at before, and we think of the ones you might have been creating in your breakout rooms, they're going to have to look different at different stages of the unit, and that's okay. So here, this comes out of the book that Catherine Ritz and I just wrote. This is kind of a chart to help you help you visualize a little bit what the unit is going to look like and what the tasks are going to look like at different stages. So if I could focus you on the first part here, right? Early unit output tasks. We're not expecting huge control of the grammar at that point. it's just conceptual. They just understand that there is something grammatical that you're eventually wanting me to do. High levels of scaffolding are going to be in place because we just kind of want them to get through the tasks. We just kind of want to help them like through everything. We're going to use familiar vocab. And again, that was one of the questions, another one of the questions I saw earlier. If it's an early one, it's going to be really familiar because we want that cognitive focus to be on the grammar. We don't want new words to be what's the problem. The type of feedback kids are going to get is just, did you complete the task? And did you comprehend what you were doing as you worked on the task? And then in terms of the self-management piece, the students are going to be really reliant on those scaffolds. All students are going to be reliant on those scaffolds in the beginning of the unit. Now, as you get towards the middle, that's where things get messy, right? And that's the scary part, but we got to get to that messy place. So we're going to start to see some partial control. We're going to see some kids really grasping things well. We're going to see some kids grasping certain verbs, for example, or certain parts of the structure, but not other parts. And so that's why it's going to be messy, is because it's just going to be partial. Now we say this medium level of scaffolding. And what we mean by medium is it's more of a it's here if you need it sort of piece. Start to get those kids ready to be like, ah, senor, I don't need that chat mat. I don't need to look at that scaffolding that you gave me there. I don't need my vocab list. I got this. And then you have some that are like, I got this. And then they realize, no, I don't got this. I really need the chat mat. And you have some that are saying, I still don't have this. I really need the chat mat, or I really need the expressions list. This is where we're going to start to combine some familiar and new vocabulary in the middle part. Because in the beginning, I just want them focusing on just getting through the task and understanding that there's a grammar piece. Now we're going to add a little bit more to build that cognitive load. The focus is going to be on comprehension, meaning how well they understood the task. And we're going to begin to focus on comprehensibility of how well their output is understood by others. And again, this is that increased awareness of their own strengths and challenges, and they're going to seek support as needed. We want to encourage them to have that moment of, oh, I really got this, or oh, no, I really don't got this. I need to ask for some extra help because I'm still not grasping whatever it is you're trying to get me to do. That late or end of unit output, depending on how you want to set it. So that's where we're going to expect some good control. We're still not expecting perfection. That's not at all what that means by good control. Good just means there's no patterns of what's going on. They can use some really frequent structures. They can use that in different contexts. At this point, though, we're going to get rid of the scaffolding, little to no scaffolding. And it's important that that last piece has little to no scaffolding because by the end of the unit, I want to see what they can do on their own. It's all about them being independent, right? We want to see, give them a little bit of agency there. I want to see what they can do when I take all the scaffolding away. Because if I always give them scaffolding from beginning, middle, and end of the unit, why do they have to learn it? They can just look at the cheat sheet. They can just look at the thing that's there in front of them. When I take it away, it's like that quote of realizing, oh, I do know this, or no, I still need to work on this. This is where that full range of vocab and content can kind of come in place. So when you looked at the future tense one that we were looking at earlier, that was an end of unit one. That was because by that point in the unit, we had done so much that we could expect the full range of anything could be asked at that point. Comprehensibility and variety of language can come in here as well. So if you teach intermediate learners, this is where you can expect more connecting words, more sophisticated transition words. You can ask them to use some level up vocab words, etc. And then the last part is that awareness of their own strengths and challenge and more independence. That's where that self-management, by the end of the unit, a kid should be able to recognize like where they're at personally, what they can be able to do, and what they need to do to kind of bridge that gap if they're not quite there yet. So that's kind of the breakdown of that. Now, again, because I recognize that there's not a lot of time, if you on your own wanted to kind of check out some of the other ones, I gave you a bunch of examples that come right out of our book as well. Sorry for the promotion, but got to throw it in there. So if you check out these, you're going to see a bunch of different examples that each one is set up the same way, where the first slide you see is always going to give the scenario, and it uses what's called the scrap model. It's just a way of setting up some cool performance tasks. So you'll always see a screenshot that's talking about, okay, here's the scenario. You'll always see the tasks. And again, if you don't speak Spanish, the translations are down on the bottom for you. But this is what an example of a scaffolded task would look like for an early unit output task. And then some key features to help you as well. Then you would see, for example, the mid-unit ones, same setup. Here's our our structure. Here's our pre-task. Here's our during task. And this is an example of one of those scaffolds that's there if they need it, not there if they don't want it. They can kind of push it aside. And some post-task information as well. And then another example of an end of unit task. And notice no scaffolding whatsoever. It's more just a conversation and some key features that go along with that. Okay? As well as that, if you are in your breakout task document, you have some more examples that you can check out as well. Again, I gave translations for things because I'm a Spanish teacher, so that's where my examples kind of come from. But you have two more examples in there as well, where you see just again a scaffolded task and all the different pieces that go along with it. And you have another task as well that's this is a mid-unit task that you can see where there's some sort of stimulus and there's some sort of piece that goes along with it, helping them to acquire some sort of new grammar. Okay. So I have about a minute before I have to pass things back over to our friends from the central office. I've done a lot of talking and I apologize. That's not normally how I would set these things up for you. But if you would just be ever so kind, flood the chat for me. When you hear the words grammar output, now based on today's conversation, based on what we've learned about today, what's a word, a phrase, or anything that kind of comes to mind? What are you going to associate now when somebody's talking about grammar output or getting kids to use the grammar? What would you say to that? If you want to throw that in the chat, you can throw it in privately or you can throw it out for everybody to take a look at. What would you say? See, enthusiastic, language and action, noticing patterns, communication, real life. Here we come with the tasks, a good situation, meaningful tasks, communication, speaking with purpose, connection, contextual, purpose, good. Oh, I like that gradual, real life communication. I'm seeing scenarios, purpose for tasks. Excellent, excellent. Oh, we're hitting on exact, I love it when you pick up on the exact words that I'm looking for out of this, right? More than conjugation, essential to language learning, comprehensibility. Awesome, awesome. So what my hope is that you'll be able to grab some of these ideas and these might inspire you to create something within your own curriculum or within your own classes where you say, all right, I actually want them to use this grammar. How can I make this kind of happen? How can I make this the focus of what I want to do? If you would like any more info on anything I chatted about, as you can tell, I do like to talk. You feel free to check out my blog. If you go there, there's a whole page on grammar where I was talking about how to help kids, notice grammatical patterns or things like that. If you go to the grammar and context section, you'll see lots of different types of ways to teach grammar and lots of like how-to graphics, all sorts of stuff there. Feel free to shoot me an email as well. I'm always happy to keep in touch and obviously to talk about grammar. It's, what warms my little heart. But I'm hoping you were able to find some new strategies. Again, I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully it's something you can grab out of this that you can apply with your students to kind of add that little piece to it. I will turn things over to my friends from central office.
Thank you, Mr. Travers. This is a great presentation. I personally enjoy it. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed it. And I do want to save a couple minutes for us to write down the takeaways from today's session. Rosanna, can you throw in the link for the Padlet? Great. if you open up the link, the Padlet link, and then scroll down to session 1 workshops, you will see go scroll down. Okay, I can actually share my, go down and see, you will see the session C. So please feel free to put on your takeaways from today. And also, as we can see, Joe already put out some resources up there for us to share. Yeah, and this is it. And yeah, Rosanna, I believe you have a attendance code you want to post so people can record their attendance. Okay.
And while you're doing that, can I throw in one quick plug, if you will?
Sure. Yeah.
It's not for the book, I promise. It's I just saw one question there that I really liked, talking about just grading when it comes to the tasks. For me, the way I have my classes set up is those tasks would actually not be graded, but what I would keep doing is showing them what they have to do by the end of the unit to kind of make that connection of if I do this, I'm basically studying for my interpersonal assessment. Or if I do this, I'm studying for my performance task that's coming up. So it's not necessarily that I'm grading each one of those tasks, because that would be a lot of grading. I got stuff to do. I got Netflix to watch. Like, so that's not something that's on the focus for me. But what I'm trying to build, if we're trying to build that independence of kids realizing, when they can use the grammar, also the independence of, if I do this task, it'll help me on this assessment. I just saw that question. I just want to throw that one in there.
Thank you so much. As we are at our time, I'm gonna close out the Zoom room in just a minute. Thank you all. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can probably email multilingual learners to get something clarified. All right, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for spending some time with me. Have a great day, everybody.
Mike, thanks
Bye.
so much.
Bye.
And Mike's book is great. Yes. Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
Jill.
Bye. See you at Nashville. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, you know
Oh, yeah.
it.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.